Hello everybody, welcome to, I believe, the second part of Jan's opening clinic number 14. So let's call this one 14A, because I had so many questions I could not get through all of them in one session. I could not get through all of them the other day, so we're resuming this. I have some fancy new designs, however I'm blocking the title of it, right? Should I sit like this? Jan's opening clinic? Why is this horse attached to stethoscope? Is that what you call it? I don't know. Anyway, the format is you guys asked me lots of opening questions in the news article that I published. And if you're a Chess24 Premium member, I shall answer them. It's first come, first serve. That's why sometimes we don't get through all of them. But I felt bad leaving so many unanswered the other day. So let's continue and see how many we can get through. I believe I left it with Mr. Proust is keen. And next in line is Fire909. What is he saying? Hi Jan, I purchased premium membership finally and I'm happy I did. Glad you like it. This site is very good, especially those video series. Thank you, sir. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, I'm a 1d4 player as of only a few months ago and I'm wondering what is an ambitious way to play against the Grunfeld. I know white can't always get an edge, but what lines don't allow easy equality for black? A lot of the lines just require black to know a few moves and he ends up with a good position. Yeah, I wish I had the answer to that question, but I don't. The Grunfeld, it's still going very strong as far as I can tell, and no one really has the answer. A lot of guys have started playing 1c4 just to avoid it, and at the top level, the main discussions nowadays are based around g3 systems, where black typically plays c6, d5, but that's not exactly an aggressive way, so I don't think that's what you're looking for. f3 was all the range for a while. All the rage, if you're willing to also play the same-ish after bishop g7, e4, then f3 is still a very topical move. As for the main line, sometimes we see some developments here and there. We had a question earlier and some queen b3. This discussion is always ongoing. Problem from white's perspective, a lot of work. You have to be ready for a6, knight a6 and knight c6, and the upside might not be that high, but queen b3 is an evergreen line. In the other main lines with cd and e4, I'm not quite sure what's going on, frankly. I haven't seen a lot of developments recently. However, we have a question coming up, I believe, about rook b1, which of course is also an evergreen move. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for your question. I normally try to avoid the Grunfeld. I either play these g3 systems or I play 1c4 or knight f3 and try to horse around it. But it's a good opening. I don't know. Sorry, man. As usual, I can refer you to Peter Svidler's excellent video series on the black side of things, where you can look for what systems he considers the most dangerous. It's a tough topic for all of us. Daniel Carvajal is asking any recommendation on how to play the King's Indian defense against the Reti and the English. Another question I might not be able to answer, at least not to your satisfaction. By the way, in case you're wondering if I lost my hand, I did not. I have to get better with cutting my camera picture. But if I made it even bigger, things would get awkward with me overtowering the chessboard. So, who knows? I'll figure it out. Anyway, playing the King's Indian against the Reti or English. What's the problem? Isn't the beauty of the King's Indian that you can just go knight f6, g6, bishop g7, castles, d6 against anything? So, I'm not sure what you mean specifically. You can certainly do this, and I'm assuming the Reti or English will include some c4, d6, knight c3. And this is a full-fledged line. It wouldn't be my first choice as black. I'm not a King's Indian player, but certainly playable. White typically goes for d3 and then some rook b1, b4 plans. I believe knight c6 is the main line. I have some sympathy for playing c6, keeping your structure a bit more flexible than maybe going a5 after rook b1 to make b4 a little harder. So that's probably how I would play the position if I was forced to play it. But the main line is knight c6, rook b1, a5, a3, h6, put the bishop on e6 with double-edged play as far as I know. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's the answer I'm gonna give. Do we have more of these questions? And I do know that we have more. Gobbedy says, I'm a terrible player. So sorry to hear that. I want to be open game about this. Is this a question or is it some poem he wrote? We'll find out. I don't spend the time to polish my game. I cannot see my opponent's tactics. I'm not aware of proper time management. Critically though, I just wing it. So like an old Indian in a maze, I'm left bewildered. Do grandmasters memorize all these unorthodox openings? I imagine it more like playing jazz piano, where the melodies and rhythms of different songs openings resurface as you improvise. I'm reading these words, I'm trying to make sense of them. I'm not sure if that's the purpose or if it's just a bunch of beautiful words put together. Or maybe it's more like a uke piano and the songs are conjured at will. Or neither here nor there, sometimes improvised in a chaotic duet. The game and also be delivered. This is a great show, boys and girls. As a prepared but well delivered masterpiece. Can you enlighten me? I'm sorry, I don't understand a word you're saying. I honestly don't. Do grandmasters memorize all these unorthodox openings? Is that the question? Nah, not really. Normally you wing it. You have some basic idea that this stuff is bad, but then at some point you gotta trust yourself to crush the unorthodox openings anyway, because else you won't get anything serious done. You won't have time to look at the serious openings if you're busy memorizing all the not so great openings. But the good thing is you can prepare for games. So if you see your opponent place an unorthodox opening on a regular basis, then you will be, or I will be, prepared for it. So that's the problem. If you play unorthodox openings, you need to switch around all the time, which costs a lot of time and energy, because else you will run into preparation. Can you enlighten me? Are you just improvisationalist or Jocko Ellington delivering calculated beauty? If you read this, I guess my opening gambit was not declined. So you got me to read it. If that was the ambition, congratulations. I'm not sure I could help you all that much, but I never am. Let's answer one question. Foxtish is saying, Hi Jan, what would you recommend against the French defense? This is a broad question, so to be more specific, are there particular games played recently that would be interesting to look at? Once again, I don't have an answer. I actually did prepare for today's session, even though it might look like I didn't very hard. But these are tough questions for me. I never play 1e4, and I never play the French defense. So I'm not exactly a specialist on the topic. Objectively, I believe knight c3 is probably the best move. However, after knight f6, e5, knight fd7, f4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3, white has been stuck a little bit recently. Interesting games to look at, theoretically, are certainly Kramnik against Buman. I believe that was a very relevant game theoretically. There's also Giri against Hari Krishna. You might want to check those out. And bishop b4 here is out of fashion. I'm not sure why. My likings would probably be more geared towards knight to d2. The problem with knight d2, in my opinion, is that after c5, ed, queen d5, black comes very close to it, or does more or less equalize. I believe there's been a recent game, Hu Yifan against Kramnik, for example, and I could never see anything special for white here. But it would be more in line with my positional, boring chess style. So if I were an e4 player, I'd probably lean towards knight d2. I hope that... Am I going to say that after every of my non-convincing answers? I hope that helped you. Probably I will. I hope that helped you. Scrap 111 is saying, Hi Jan, in the recent time I faced a lot of problems in the Ruy-Lopez exchange variation from the black point of view. Sorry to hear that. My pet line has been e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, takes, castles, bishop g4, but even after just allowing the double f pawns with h3, h5, d3, queen f6, bishop e3, bishop f3, I find myself in an unpleasant endgame, as white can generate a lot of pressure along the g-file. I kind of get your point, it's not considered to be unpleasant, that endgame. Do you have any recommendations how to deal with the exchange variation? Keep up the great work. Scrap 1-1-1. The good thing about the exchange variation is that all the lines against it work. So once again, I'm gonna go non-specific and say depends on the opponent and if you're playing for trying to get a sharp game or if you're trying to be solid and so on and so forth. First, let's address the line you mentioned. Bishop g4, h3, h5, d3, queen f6. Knight bd2 is the main line when g5 is interesting. Knight e7 is also close to equality. But yeah, I understand this can be a bit of a bother going for this endgame. However, it's not supposed to be anything really. Black goes bishop d6, knight e7, knight g6, f6, king f7, c5 if need be. And he's supposed to be perfectly alright. So I don't think this is a theoretical problem. It's more of a stylistic nuisance, which I understand. I've also avoided that endgame at times. I do believe that there's plenty playable moves. I've recommended queen f6 in the past. d4 takes, bishop g5, queen d6, knight d4, bishop d7, which I think is a very decent variation. I do think that knight e7 is very interesting. Knight takes e5, queen to d4, with some big complications. After something like this is the main line. So I do think this is quite playable for black if you're looking for a sharper fight. What else is there? f6 I'm not so big on these days. Bishop g4, once again, if you want to spice it up. h3, bishop h5 is the line I've dabbled in or dabbled with? I believe dabbled in. Peter Svidler would correct me. Dabbled in as well. Stuff like this. I'm not sure it's 100% correct, but it's a lot more fun than these endgames. So I hope that gave you some inspiration. In order to be solid, the line you're playing is already perfectly fine. If you want to spice it up a little, knight e7 or bishop g4, bishop h5 do come into consideration. In my humble opinion. Not that humble, really. Not qualified, but also not humble. I still have a cold, so I'm gonna apologize for my nasal drone once in a while. Another question. Gone Freaks, unfortunately, not a premium member. You have to ignore that one. Doorchair says, hey Jan, I'm a big fan of the Nimzo from the black side and have been playing it since I was a kid. Thanks for making a new series on it. You're very welcome. In the last 5 years or so, after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, I've had to face the Catalan more often than the Nid or Kit. Nimzo Indian defense or Queen's Indian defense. I've watched your video series, but I still loathe the opening as black. Sorry to hear that. I did a video series with the black repertoire on the Catalan, but I'm not gonna deny that it's a very solid opening. Against the English, I normally play e5. Against d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, g3, I'm happy with b6 or b5. The main problem is the move order d4, c4, g3. I don't want to go into Benoni or Catalan. Lately I've taken extreme measures and started playing the Grunfeld. It's a lot of fun, but I prefer the Nimzo Queen's Indian. Yeah, that sounds like, well, it's a good idea to learn a new opening, of course. And playing the Grunfeld, you could certainly do a lot worse. But it sounds like a bit of an overreaction to me. And once you have faced your share of g3 Grunfelds, I'm not sure if you're not gonna feel the same troubles. But yeah, this is the move order that's bothering you. You've mentioned the options. You don't want to go c5 because you don't like d5. And you don't want to go d5, which really are the two options in this position. So I think you just have to make up your mind. There's not so much I can do to help you. In my series, I gave bishop e7. The other fully playable main line, which I also mentioned in the series, is bishop b4 check, bishop d2, and now bishop back to d6, or the main line bishop to e7, which might be maybe more to your liking. I don't know, castles. And then you play with c6, b6, bishop to b7 or a6, knight bd7. I'm not a specialist here, I have to admit, but maybe it's closer to Queen's Indian things than what I mentioned in the series. But else, just make up your mind, man. There's always going to be openings on the black side where you don't enjoy the nature of play that much. Just got to work on them. It's not much to do about it. I'm sorry. Jamilo is saying, hi Jan. What would be your recommendation for a 1600 till 1700 player to approach opening studies? Would it be good to try to get an idea of many openings as to find the one that fits my way of playing, or is it better to practice lines off a specific opening as to get confidence. I hope you understand me. Thanks. And I do understand you. I'm not sure I can help, as usual. I keep saying that. But yeah, it's been a long time since I was a 16, 1700 player. I was a very young man then, and times have changed, technology has changed, so I can't relate all that well. I've normally tried with black to learn one opening and to become good at it. Let's say one opening against d4 at a phase where I played the Grunfeld, for example, and against e4 at a phase where I played whatever, the Taimanov. And then, should I notice these openings don't work that well for me, I normally try to learn a new opening, but I focused on one at a time. I'm not sure that is always a valid approach. What you're saying, to learn many openings and to get a feel for which one you like, there's also a lot to be said for it. So, do I have to go for another cop-out? It depends. A lot of guys became very successful just playing many openings, not even specializing that much in one. Or at least coming up, guys like Carlsen, Nakamura, they've always been able to play many different things, which means you can't go as deeply into one. Then again, it's harder to get the time if you want to study multiple openings, so I would probably start with a good video series, let's say mine. Now, whatever you can find, or a good book on an opening that you like against d4 and against e4, and take it from there. For white, I've always tried to be more flexible and adjust to what my opponents do, because it's very hard to have a steady repertoire with white in the long run. You gotta be flexible there. So, once again, not sure that helped. You probably wanted to hear, read this book, read that book, spend 2 hours a day on that, but everyone's situation and all that is different. So, hard to say. Main sequence. Saying, hi Jan, as a player who likes to play the exchange Queen's Gambit decline with Knight g2. Example, Knight c3, Knight f6, cd, ed, bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, c6, bishop d3, Knight bd7, Queen c2, castle, Knight e2, rook e8. I have few difficulties facing the move 3, bishop e7. Could you explain if there are any downsides to this move in order for black, and how white could try for an advantage? She is Kyle. I believe we've had the topic come up in episode 14, which is, the show I did yesterday. So you can look it up there, but of course I'll still address it. And bishop e7, is a perfectly valid line, and it does stop the line you mentioned. However, it does have some downsides. The first, most obvious downside is if you go knight f6 and white goes knight f3, you're not committed to bishop e7 here. You can play bishop b4, you can play dc, you can play c6, you can play knight bd7, you can play c5. You have a lot more options, while after bishop e7, knight f3, you're pretty much stuck with knight f6. That's the only good move here. So you're committing to playing the Queen's Gambit declined, where bishop f4 is still as decent a bet for an advantage as I'm aware of. If you want to insist on playing the exchange, of course you can't play bishop g5 here, so after cd, ed, you have to go bishop f4. And black has a white choice, or I'm not sure if it's a white choice, but there's a bunch of lines here. c6, where you can go queen c2 or e3, or knight f6, e3, and then either bishop f5 or castles. All of those are playable, but there's been a trend that the bishop often rather would be on f4 than on g5. So all of these lines, as far as I know, are quite playable for white as well. However, it's not as static as the one you mentioned. One last point, a line I've dabbled with, is the immediate bishop f4 here, trying to move order black a little bit. Knight to f6, they normally go, then you go e3, and after castles, you can use some subtleties because you haven't played knight f3 yet. Some guys tried a3 here, I think I've tried rook to c1, and for many black players, this will be unpleasant as well, because it's sort of messing with their normal schemes. So can't promise you an opening advantage. Bishop e7 is a fine line, but those are kind of the things I think about when facing it. Joel Artemio Morales. Somehow, ever since we resumed, I get a lot more broad and general questions, which I struggle with a lot more. I'm easier if you give me some position and I read out the computer move and pretend this is my wisdom. It's easier for me. Anyway, Joel Artemio Morales says, hi Jan, I was looking for a safe and simple choice to play versus the King's Indian defense. Another question that comes up a bit. It's not a question I've been able to answer throughout my long, prestigious chess career. The King's Indian, well, I'm not a big fan. It's hard to suck the life out of it, so to say. So yeah, not sure I'll be able to give you what you need. Safe and simple. That's asking a lot, isn't it? Anyway, what can I tell you? d4, knight f6. You can play my very safe, very simple move, knight bd2. I've experimented with that. After bishop g7, you go e4, and you don't go c4. Most King's Indian players don't like this. You would follow up with bishop d3 and c3. If they play d5 after knight bd2, you can play something like b4, bishop g7, e3. The plan is to go bishop b2, c4, bishop e2, and we have a safe position with a bit of an edge. Probably the best move is c5, then you take queen a5, a3, queen takes c5, b4, queen c7, put the bishop here, play c4, play e3, play bishop e2, go short castles. And once again, you have a very safe position. Unfortunately, you're not better, but this is as safe and simple as I got. Else, yeah, if you want a more serious line, of course, all the fianchetto lines are very much en vogue nowadays, but they're not that simple. So yeah, it's a tough one. Let me clean my nose, watch your th, but in nose there's no th. For 1 second, be right back. Here we go again with more questions on chess openings. Hi Jan, do you have any recommendations against the Trompowsky? Sure, I do. Once again, sort of broad. I really prefer if you give me a position. Makes things so much easier for me. But yeah, against the Trompowsky, I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school. The best move, in my opinion, is to just play d5. After bishop takes f6, both ef and gf are fine. I would go gf, tending e3, c5, transposing to the line they normally play nowadays, which is d5, e3, c5. And here, after bishop f6, gf, white has experimented with many moves, but I don't think any of them are particularly scary. D takes c5. We've recently seen in the match Carlsen Karjakin, where black can go e6 or knight c6. This was the match, bishop b5, e6, and Karjakin, was it e6 or queen a5, e6? No, I think e6, and Karjakin did equalize. c4 is sometimes played, but here I believe there's some sharp line that's supposed to be fine for black, right? Takes and queen b6, maybe? I believe this is supposed to be quite alright for black. Knight c3 is sometimes played. Also this position, I have a hard time believing that white could be better. You go e6, knight c6. So yeah, that would be my choice. Sometimes white does something else like c3, but that's also a bit hard to believe. Here, yeah, queen b6 looks like a good move in general. If white plays too passively, it's hard to believe he can get an advantage in these positions. I believe this is a recent Carlsen game. c3, queen b6, queen c2, something like this. Not even here, let's say takes, knight e4. I believe black is very solid at the very least. So yeah, I would play d5. Of course, if it slightly depends on your tastes. Like if you're a Benoni player, you probably prefer something like knight e4 followed by c5. Or if you're a King's Indian player, same thing. Or maybe the immediate c5. Well, if you're, I don't know, a Queen's Indian player, you might want to play e6 here. Stuff like that. But my recommendation would be to play 2d5 for sure. Ale Arroyo says, hello Jan, thanks for your awesome work, thank you so much. In the Marshall, if black plays 17 bishop e6 instead of bishop g6, how am I supposed to react? Is this playable? I watched your Marshall series from the white side. Did I do it from the black side? But yeah, so you're trying to crush me. And bishop e6 I think is bad. No, it doesn't look so logical because it's not keeping the e file open. Let's see. How do we get there? Oops, sorry. Bishop e7 here, here. Long theoretical line here. Rook e8. Takes. Knight d2, queen e1, knight f1. And you're saying bishop e6 instead of bishop g6. But I'm not sure I get the point, because you want to be very active with black. You want to keep an eye on the d3 pawn, and you want to stop white from untangling. Well, bishop e6 doesn't seem to achieve these things. You're threatening bishop h2, but if white just goes h3, then I can't really see a way to stop white from simplifying. Queen e4 is coming. There's also another standard idea of bishop to d1, followed by bishop to d2. So to me it looks like white just has a very serious edge here. After rook e8, for example, which looks logical, bishop d1 intending bishop d2. And it does not look like the black initiative is here to stay. If the queen retreats, there's always d4, since h2 is covered. And yeah, there's not all that much you can do. So bishop e6 looks like a bad move, and I would not recommend it. Nazgu1 is saying, "Hey Jan, I want to pick up an opening repertoire. Which openings should you learn first? And do you have to learn openings for 1 e4, 1 d4 and 1 c4? Or is one opening enough when you begin to play chess seriously? Thank you for answering my question." I'm assuming you're asking from the black side of the board, because with white it's certainly enough, especially if you're starting out, to start playing 1 e4 or 1 d4 or even 1 c4 and take it from there. With black you probably want to give some thought how you want to reply to all of these moves. There's not a one-size-fits-all against 1 e4, d4 and c4. Of course you could play 1 g6 against everything, but I don't think that's what you want when you want to build your opening repertoire. So yeah, with black you want to have an opening against e4. Choose whatever you like. Choose a line of the Sicilian, a line of e4, e5, the French, the Caro-Kann, whatever. And same thing against 1 d4. Choose an opening or an opening combination that suits you, like the Queen's Gambit Nimzo from my series, like the Grunfeld, like the King's Indian. Like, yeah, whatever you feel might be to your liking. 1 c4 normally will be linked to your 1 d4 repertoire in a way, but you can also play it independently and go 1 c4, e5. So yeah, with black you need to learn a couple things. With white it's perfectly fine if you start with one move. Sutake002 says, "Jan, FYI, I signed up for a premium membership after your excellent commentary on the World Championship match with Peter Svidler. Glad you enjoyed it. I'm finding that lower-rated players are tending to play the exchange Slav, d4, d5, c4, c6, cd, cd against me. So what approach would you recommend for black to unbalance the position?" I don't know. If that's a phenomenon that keeps happening to you, then maybe you might want to have a different opening than the Slav against lower-rated players. I think there's plenty of room to work with in the exchange Slav as well. Just being patient, not like going too crazy, playing on. And you can make white work for it. But if you feel this is trouble and you're drawing too many low-rated players, then maybe don't play the Slav, because the Slav really is the only main line where white can get a symmetrical structure on move 3. Therefore, yeah, it's hard to fully spice it up here. I'm normally, yeah, I don't know, people dabble with all kinds of crazy moves like knight h5, knight e4. I'm a classical boring guy, so I would probably, even if they do the most boring stuff, just play this position and here. Try to keep the bishop on the board. And I would guess there's many times still enough material and play left on the queen side to outplay a lower rated player here. So I would not be that worried about it. But if you feel it's bothering you, maybe you start your games with e6. Play the triangle, play whatever, the Queen's Gambit. Play what I've been recommending, the Nimzo and the Vienna. Play the Grunfeld. Or, yeah, learn something against lower rated players, because d4, d5, c4, c6 does have that built-in feature indeed. Then again, I struggle believing that the exchange Slav, if you're the stronger player, you won't be able to generate winning chances, even in some dullish positions. Arthur O'Sheg is saying, "Hi Jan, first of all, thank you and Chess24 for your incredible work in 2016. Thank you so much. And now about chess. Why did Black stop playing Paulsen's line, which was pretty popular on GM level in early 2010s? And then we get a long line, knight c2, rook d8, or 12 king b1, rook d8. I don't think they stopped playing that line in particular. I do agree with your sentiment to some extent at least. Feels like it's gotten a little less popular. I do believe the main reason is this weird move, queen to f3, which is what they're all playing at the top level now. You might want to check out the game by, for example, Caruana against Kramnik, where Kramnik had one outing with this setup, and many other high-level games, Anish Giri, a lot of games on the black side. So this is what White has been using to ask some questions. I think Kramnik also played with White. While the line you're mentioning, I'm far from a specialist. You probably have watched Robin van Kampen's video series on this. As far as I know, is considered quite playable for Black. But I have to admit, I don't have a clue here. Rook d8, knight g3 is what the computer says. And the computer says White is better. But I honestly know nothing at all. So you might want to consult Robin's series there. If you're asking me why I think it's become less popular, I think it's because of 7 queen f3, where Black is struggling to find a good reply. Rendsburger is saying, "Hi Jan, you mentioned in one of your Banter Blitz sessions that you often pre-move one knight f6 when playing Bullet, which is true, even though it makes zero sense because the clock normally in Bullet only starts running after your first move, right? Still I do it, creature of habit. So you must have some experience playing the black side of the Alekhine, also true, but I never looked at it at all. It's just I get stuck there in every Bullet game, or every other Bullet game, let's say. And I never know what to do. What do you recommend against a 4 pawns attack? f4, some recent books give g6, bishop f5, de, fe, c5, and the wacky g5 are also played. Are any of these lines even remotely good enough for equality, and not just as a surprise weapon or in Bullet? The high level players that go for the main line, most of the times de, fe, knight c6, bishop e3, bishop f5, knight c3, knight f3. Choice, which one would you pick? I don't have a clue about any of these things. First of all, don't play the Alekhine, or the Ayekhin as I call it. Learn some other opening. This is asking for it. Secondly, I'm surprised that, because from my Bullet experience, 100% of players play e takes d6 in this position. Maybe 98%, but it looks like the whole internet has agreed. Let's not play knight f3 here. Let's all play c4, knight b6, e takes d6, which in fairness is a decent line. White is a bit better. I always play ed6 and suffer a bit, at least in Bullet. But yeah, I'm surprised that you've even encountered f4. In Bullet, in the 1% or 2% of cases where people don't go for ed6, I always play this, but that's mainly because I'm trying to win the game quickly after d6, queen h4 check, g3, queen e4, which happens quite a bit. But objectively, White is better after knight to c3 here. Unfortunately, as far as I know, takes, c4, d6. So I haven't looked for an alternative or for a way to equality. The computer says that in the main line, well, how does the main line go? Bishop f5 here. White is better as well after knight c3, e6. Even knight f3 immediately. Doesn't really, look all that inspiring either. And it looks like the few better players that sometimes play the Alekhine recently have played g6 in this position, which I've never looked at. Looks like a sensible approach though, g6, castles, c5. So I would probably go with g6, but as mentioned, I played the Alekhine a lot in Bullet. I have never looked at it, and I'm not intending to look at it, because I do not consider it to be a fully sound opening. Like on the list of answers to e4, it's probably e5, c5, then c6, then e6, then g6, then d6, then d5, then knight f6 and b6. That would be my order more or less. So I would pick one of the moves I mentioned ahead of knight f6. Oops, I started something. I don't know what was. I clicked something on the computer. It's always scary. Luke is asking, hi Jan, what's the best line in the Queen c2 Nimzo when black plays knight fe4 instead of the more common knight ce4? d4, knight f6, let's put it on the board. Thanks, Luke. This is a line I gave in one of my video series as a white repertoire, so I should know such things, even though he's right, knight fe4 is hardly ever played. Can't recall if I covered this in my video series or what I gave. However, my powerful computer after knight fe4 gives this slightly counterintuitive but very solid move, bishop to d2. His point being that if black captures here after knight takes d2, with his knight on c5, black will not be able to keep his bishop because it's blocking the way back. Therefore, white will get the two bishops and slightly, well, white will cut the black two bishops in half. White will get this bishop and enjoy a slightly better position thanks to his active fianchetto bishop. And there's some other lines, maybe this is a more precise way to play, something like this, followed by b6. But white is always a tiny bit better in all these positions after castles, followed by rook fd1. So I would probably advocate 9 bishop d2. Castles is interesting as well, but bishop d2 seems to lead to a safer small advantage without having to know anything. Rockero is saying, hi Jan, thank you for your work in Chess24. You are welcome. I want to know what is the way to play versus this system with white. I only see draw positions and I have other questions. I can only go with one, so we'll go with this one. And yeah, is it me or I get a lot of questions that are not identical, but they're all connected to this Queen's Gambit declined Karlsbad structure, which I refused to cover in my black repertoire video series because I sort of lost faith in it. Looks like the users are a little more stubborn than me, understandably, and are doing a lot of research here. So Rockero says with white he's stuck though. What observations do I have? First of all, this is a very solid line played by Mickey Adams, so I'm not surprised it's hard to get an advantage there. Secondly, it's a bit of a move order thing once again. The position you had on the board, let's say, okay, we start with this. I'm sorry, I'm really into move orders. Takes, bishop g5, black goes c6. Here, well, my problem is e3, that bishop f5, queen f3 is trouble. So you can start with e3, you don't have to go queen c2 here. Let's say black goes bishop e7, we go bishop d3, knight bd7. Here, white can play the move knight ge2 without committing to queen c2. And after knight ge2, if black goes for the same idea, h6, bishop h4, bishop, knight h5, takes, then white has some more options. Mainly, he can put his queen on d2, not on c2, which is a slightly better square here, because we want to go rook to e1 onto d1, and often f3, e4. There's other subtleties to know there. After queen d2, rook a e1, in some lines you want to regroup this knight all the way here. So I do believe that this is an important little difference and can help trying for an advantage if you can do without queen c2 here and start with knight ge2. As for this position, yeah, it keeps getting played. I never really understood if the pawn is better on h7 or h6. Both have pros and cons. White normally castles queenside, but yeah, here I'm also not quite sure how to get anything. There were a couple high-level games, like something like this is Aronian Carlsen maybe, bishop g4, and he played king b1. The computer said rook dg1 is an interesting move here, preparing knight e5. So there's some play here as well, but I would probably try to do without queen c2 and start with an early knight ge2. Mr. Rosebuster is saying, lol, 85 comments. Good luck, Jan. Get Radio Jan to help you. Doesn't sound like Rosebuster has a question, so thanks for weighing in. Why is it a clinic anyway? Yeah, I don't know. We just make up stuff. We don't even check if this is proper English. I think we mainly call it opening clinic, so I can use this picture. Nasty King 37 says, hi Jan, first of all, thank you and Chess24 for your incredible work in 2016. Thank you, thank you. As black, I've faced many times the English opening, and I always reach some solid position after 1 c4, c5, which I don't really like. Which response would you recommend in order to have a more complicated game when facing the English opening? Thanks again. I don't know, but yeah, c4, c5 of course is a bit symmetrical, so if you don't like that, then maybe go c4, e5, no? Break the symmetry. Grab space in the center. And then, yeah, it's every man for himself as to building their repertoire here. Most guys at the highest level like playing with d5 against anything. But there's also other ways to play. Like Vishy Anand recently has been playing knight c3, bishop b4 quite successfully. Knight d5, bishop c5, knight f3, c6, knight c3, d6. Getting decent positions from this. And they're quite unbalanced too. If white starts with g3, not knight c3, you can play c6, for example. Meet d4 with e4, with another very unbalanced position, with knight f3 with e4 as well. So maybe that's a direction you want to look into if you're not happy with your c4, c5. Having said that, I do consider c4, c5 to be a perfectly good move as well. What do we have next? Penthe is saying, in the London system, after d4, d5, bishop f4, knight f6, e3, c5, c3, knight c6, knight d2, e6, knight f3, knight g3, bishop d6, bishop g3, castles. Magnus Carlsen played 8 bishop b5 in 2 games on Doha. 3 games, right? Against, I can't remember, against Korobov, against Vishy, and against, who was it? Bosiocic, I believe. Anyway, I noticed that, and he did very, very well after both knight e7 and a6, as you point out. So you're asking me what I would suggest. We've covered a bit of the topic of the London. Yeah, excellent English, Jan. Bit of the London already. Which move order did I have? Did I have this? No. I'm sorry if this is not the right move order, but you get the idea. Bishop d6, bishop g3, this seems to be the critical move nowadays. Castles, and bishop to b5 is the trendy choice. They used to play bishop d3, but then after b6, black was sort of doing alright. So Carlsen started playing this bishop b5 move, and I agree. He got great positions after knight e7, bishop d3, or after a6, bishop c6. I would suggest, inspired by Mr. Computer, to play the weird move bishop to e7. No more exchanges. Now that you've committed to bishop b5 and bishop g3, I don't really want to exchange the dark square bishops. I want to get your dark square bishop by playing knight h5. And yeah, the lack of exchange of these guys also makes it a lot less appealing for white to take here, because with the dark square bishop on the board still, I can control the dark squares much better. So bishop to e7 might look like a weird move, but I think it's very justified. And I do think that, because it's the first move of the computer, is what I would do. Computer says dc5, then after bishop c5. I don't really see what the big issue is. Castles, we can even go back again, then play queen b6. Looks perfectly playable for black. So that would be my recommendation. Nihal Sarin says, hi Jan, what setup do you prefer for black against the London system? I think I answered the same question in the yesterday's part of the show, but for now, let's keep things short and let's say I recommend the setup I was just talking about. I believe this bishop e7 looks like a decent move. If bishop d3 instead of bishop b5, b6 looks like a very playable approach. Once again, one key is after e4, you can just go bishop e7, and after e5, go knight h5. go after this bishop. So bishop back to e7 keeps being a theme. And if they go knight to e5, after queen c7, knight df3, black is fine in many a way. cd, c4, let's say cd, ed, knight e4. I believe it's perfectly fine for black. So that's the setup I would recommend. Not sure if that's true, but I gave a different answer in yesterday's show. Can't always repeat myself, that'd be boring. Nazar is saying, "Hi Jan, my question is regarding the Nimzo Indian. In lines where black chooses to play b6, bishop a6 and knight c6, knight a5 system against the c4 pawn, there are some variations where he has to first go bishop a7, I guess you mean bishop b7, and then bishop a6 instead of bishop a6 straight away. Can you please tell which variations are these and explain the reason for this subtlety?" I don't get the question. You're saying there are some variations where black goes bishop b7 and bishop a6. Then you're asking me which variations these are. I don't know these variations. I'm not aware of any places where black has to go bishop b7 and then bishop a6, honestly. So you're talking about this line. Well, yeah, the normal move is to start with knight c6 or castles. Maybe you mean starting with b6 in order to go bishop d3, bishop b7. That is a subline that I was discussing in the comments. I don't recommend it because of moves like e4 and more surprises here. But else, I can't think of any scenario where you go bishop b7 and then bishop a6. So I'm sorry, no, I don't think there is any such line that you need to be aware of. The bishop wants to go to a6 and the knight to c6 and often a5 to put pressure on this pawn in these variations. Sorry if I'm missing your point. Next time, tell me the line, then I might be able to help. I'm not quite aware. Choose me for banter is saying, "Hi Jan, thank you for being there for me chess-wise. I have two questions, but I can only answer one. You know the rules, choose me for banter. Number one, do you think the following line brings white an advantage according to the state-of-the-art theory? d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, e3. I'm specifically talking about the plan of trying to obtain the two bishops. For example, bishop f5, knight c3, knight e6, knight h4, and something similar against for bishop g4. I'm not sure we can say it brings white an advantage. It's a popular main line, and most of these popular main lines are somewhere between. Black equalizes and white tries to get an advantage, but I'm gonna go as far as saying it's a main line for a reason, and white has excellent chances of playing for an advantage with it. So if you don't mind the slightly slower play resulting from this stuff, it's certainly fully playable. You do try to grab this bishop, as you mentioned, and something similar against bishop g4, probably something like h3, g4, knight e5. I'm not sure if it gives an advantage, but it's a line that remains very, very popular, and that's for good reasons. So if you want to play with white, by all means, go ahead. Tim Stemmler saying, "Hi Jan, was würdest du hier für Weiß empfehlen?" Doesn't feel like writing in English. He's asking what I would recommend for white in this position. This is a deeply theoretical Grunfeld on move, I don't know, it's a rook b1 Grunfeld, move something. I used to be an expert in this line, but that's like literally almost 20 years ago. Nowadays, oops, sorry. Let's get to the position. Nowadays, the main thing I know is the recent games. I believe the most recent is Nisi Piano against MVL, where bishop g5 is played. And it looked to me like white got some pressure, even though the position might be a draw after that. But that's probably what I would recommend. Rook takes b7 is also a move, but it's kind of drawish. Bishop e3 has more or less been solved. So I would recommend this line. This, for whatever reason, is state-of-the-art theory. Yeah, they used to play bishop f6, but they've gone away from it, started playing b6. When after a long forced line, white emerges an exchange up. This 20h3 is an important subtlety. Takes, and now white gets all the material back, which leads to a position where black has one pawn for the exchange. He should be able to make a draw, but I don't think it's gonna be all that much fun for black after rook fd1 or rook fe1. And that's probably... Oh, I forgot the board, didn't I? Yeah, sorry. Good thing no one's watching. So just, yeah. Fast forward the 1 minute where I was talking about this line without showing you the board. My apologies. So bishop g5 would be my recommendation when nowadays they play this long forced weird line. Bishop c5, b6, takes, rook fe8, d6, knight c6, bishop b5, takes, h3, important new idea, which I've seen in the game. I believe it was Nisipiano against Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, MVL, probably the biggest Grunfeld, well, not many big Grunfeld specialists out there, one of the biggest out there. When black still has to make a draw in this position. He does have a pawn for the exchange, but it looks to me like he has to suffer a little bit, like after rook fd1 or rook fe1. He should probably hold, but that's what I would go for in the position you gave me, which is the position after bishop to g4. Yeah, I'm being informed the board was missing. Thanks. I'm sorry. We got it now. Yeah, there's alternatives, which I was also... Oops. See? Very easy to click and the board goes. I was also briefly talking about rook b7, but I believe this has been more or less worked out towards a draw. Till a draw. Bishop e3 is also less popular nowadays. So bishop g5 would be my recommendation, but don't quote me. Or do. Alright, one next question. Superfishy24 is saying, hi Jan, could you give your opinion and some analysis about the line e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, ed, knight d4, knight f6, takes, e5, queen e7, queen e2, knight d5, h4, which was played many times by Morozevich, most recently played against Anand. Thank you. Yeah, I noticed he likes to do that. The move doesn't make a lot of sense, which I believe is also what Morozevich likes about it. He has been quoted saying something like, it's so stupid. That's why I like it. And yeah, there's not much I can add. I believe the main point is to meet g6 with bishop g5 normally. Against a lot of lines you go g6 here. But else it's a loss of time, not always ideal. Black should probably use this time he saved best to play a5. Normally after c4 you have to decide on bishop a6 or knight b6 immediately. Here you have time to play a5, which makes bishop a6 much stronger, because this bishop is no longer hanging on that a6 square in many a line. It's also useful for black strategically to get an a5. You might be able to go a4, undermine a b3 move. Your queen on b4 will be covered. So I believe a5 is what should be played, and black gets a fine position. For example, c4, knight b6, knight c3, queen e6. Once again, this is looming, this is coming, and we have a theoretical position with h4, a5 included, which favors black here. The last outing Morozevich had with his line, he played knight d2, I think, then bishop a6, c4, g6. Looked perfectly fine to me now that this bishop can no longer go to g5. We want to go bishop g7 next move. And once again, black seemed to be in decent shape to me. It's a funny little move, but I don't think it's gonna cause black players all that many sleepless nights. Still, kudos to Morozevich for coming up with a playable, I don't know if it's new, but it was new to me, idea in this very well-known position, h4. What is next? Or who is next? Johann Wilhelm Möbius. Hi Jan, I have a question about MVL's opening play. Do you think MVL will change his opening repertoire or his style of play after working with Carlsen? Do you have an idea why MVL is playing the boring symmetrical lines against 1c4 or knight f3, 2c4, instead of playing something as competitive as Najdorf Grunfeld? What would you recommend him to play against 1c4 that suits the Najdorf-Grünfeld style? I don't know. I don't know the answer to any of your questions. I don't know if he's gonna change his repertoire or style of play after working with Carlsen. And I don't know what would be as competitive, as you call it, against knight f3 or c4 as the Grünfeld or Najdorf. I don't think the line he's playing is boring at all, to be honest with you. Isn't he playing this stuff? Knight f3, c5, c4, knight c6, knight c3, e5. That's his line, right? Things normally get extremely sharp very quickly here. Some stuff like this. I don't know. Strikes me as an extremely competitive choice already. So I'm not sure we can accuse him of cowardice or not playing entertainingly enough against knight f3. But I do not know. Many Grünfeld players, of course, try to reach Grünfeld territory here as well by playing knight f6, knight c3, d5 with either c5 or g6. But I'm sure Maxime has his reasons for not doing that and playing his line instead. Sorry, je ne sais pas. Dear Mr. Gustafsson, as a Grünfeld player, I'm working on, as a current Grünfeld player, I'm working on a Nimzo Ragozin repertoire against 1d4. I see. This means I'll have to learn a whole new bunch of sidelines like the London system, etc. After 1d4, knight f6, knight f3, I have a choice to make. To e6 or to d5. What is your advice? My level is around 2300. That's, I think, an easy question. You want to go d5, no question about it. All the sidelines gain in strength if you've committed to e6. And if you want to play the Ragozin or any system based on d5, c4, e6, there is absolutely no reason to start with e6. You only start with e6 if you're a Queen's Indian player here. But after e6, all these moves like e3, bishop f4, bishop g5 gain in strength, or at least give white more options. So, for example, after bishop g5, you still can go knight e4. After bishop f4, you have the option of playing this stuff. Yeah, it's a no-brainer, really. You want to play d5. e3, you can play c5. You want to play d5, not e6. Might have repeated myself there a couple times. Dr. Boki, quick question. As I see, there are a lot of questions to the opening advisor of the world champion. Will there be a fourth part of your series against Trump, London, Torre, etc.? Yes, there will be. Taxi, dear Jan, and no, I don't know when yet. Dear Jan, what do you suggest for black after c4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, e4? Will this be part of your repertoire against 1d4? Technically not against 1d4, but yeah, I've given it some thought. Not sure I would recommend that. I do think it's a very valid question though. Because, of course, when you're repertoire building, you need to think, can't I use all this stuff I learned against 1d4, against 1c4 as well? This is easier for Queen's Gambit players that can just play c4, e6, knight c3, d5, but it's a little tougher for Nimzo guys because, as you correctly mentioned, white gains this extra option. I have to admit, I'm not very familiar with it. But from what I hear, the main lines after d5 here are quite playable for like e5, d4, ef, dc. And as far as I can tell, black is in decent shape here, but I've never done any serious work on them. So I wouldn't know for sure. After d4, I've noticed some people start playing b6, which could be interesting. So this is, yeah, the one main line, the other is cd, ed, and now e5, when I believe they go knight e4. Both with complicated play, but not hopeless for black. I'm not sure if I would go for this as black, and I don't have any immediate plans to cover it. I've always said that I do think that e5 is the most principled way to meet c4. But it is a very valid point. If this line is fine for black, which honestly I don't know, then you can save yourself a lot of work by just going for that. And alternatively transposing to the Nimzo or whatever white wants to do after knight f6, knight c3, e6, let's say knight f3, d5, d4. But yeah, sorry, not an expert there. Where is your mic? Says, hi Jan, in your videos about the Nimzo, you recommend d4, knight f6, 4a3. Or 4a3 questions. No one ever plays that move. Takes, c5, f3, knight c6, e4, d6, bishop e3, castles, bishop d3, b6, knight e2, bishop a6, knight g3, rook c8, queen e2. The instructive maneuver, knight d7, going to e5, if possible, rook c1, queen c7. The explanation that the c4 pawn will sooner or later drop, and white will not have enough play for it. I analyze the position a little further, and I'm a bit afraid to play this in a tournament game, because the white plan with f4, f5, knight h5, and potential sacrifices on f6 or h6 seem quite dangerous for black. Could you maybe go a little deeper into the mentioned position and give your opinion on how black can deal with the upcoming threats? Thanks in advance, and also thank you very much for your amazing work here, Chess24, which helped me a lot to improve my game from 1900 to close to 2200 now. Congratulations! Always good to hear a success story. Once again, I do have the slight problem of my goldfish memory. Like the second I record something, I forgot what I recommended here. And to be perfectly frank, I don't consider these lines dangerous for black at all, because black has different options at pretty much every juncture that are all fine. So there is quite a bit of a margin for error. But I'm surprised, then again, I am sometimes absent-minded and I haven't gone back to look it up. I'm surprised that you mentioned queen e2, knight d7, and now rook to c1, because that just seems bad. Here we can take and go queen f6, or go queen f6 immediately, but queen f6 looks very strong when material is gonna drop, for example, queen f2 or queen b2, knight a5, and this time around there's not gonna be a very scary attack after bishop takes c4. So I'm guessing, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that the line you're referring to starts with castles, knight to a5, and now rook to c1, where if after queen to c7, I'm not sure about the move order or what I gave, but this makes some sense to me. After queen c7, f4, white does indeed get compensation. Takes, f5, stuff like this. I put my computer on here. This seems to be leading to some equal position. Knight h5, king h8, queen g4, rook g8. White gets his pawn back on e6 with egalite. But I will admit that it does look a little scary. And there's other options like f6, g6, bishop h6 that don't seem to do any particular harm, but you still gotta be ready for. So I can understand your concern. Once again, I'm not sure what I mentioned in the series. I had a look now, and speaking about alternatives, I think I mentioned something like cd, e5, but I'm not sure it was this position. My computer was also spitting out the move queen f6, which looks quite appealing. Even here. One point is after knight h5, which looks obvious, queen h4, knight g3. No. First of all, we could repeat with queen f6, but hang on, I'm confused. I'm sorry, I got confused. Oh no, I meant a different line. I meant if white starts with f4. Yeah, after knight h5, queen h4, yeah, knight g3, this doesn't make a lot of sense. We can go back, or we can probably go g6 either. But I meant f4, which looks logical. Now takes, and knight h5, because if recaptures, then black just takes the pawn. Here, if cd were in time to, surprisingly, not g5, but g6, surprisingly counter very effectively with this idea of knight g4. Even though white got his dream center, knight g4 is very strong. However, these lines, yeah, they're a bit computerish. My thing is, I don't respect white's setup. I don't think it's correct, and probably that's a bit naive. Sometimes I do underestimate these long-term attacking chances. But yeah, if you switch on the computer, d6, knight d7 is not forced, but it made some sense to me. It will give you many options here saying that black is perfectly fine. Be it cd followed by e5, cd followed by knight a5, cd followed by queen f6, or the immediate queen f6. Therefore, I wouldn't be that concerned, but thank you for pointing out that this plan, which I mentioned with knight a5, rook c1, queen c7, white does indeed gain some compensation after f4, f5. However, there's So many options for black that I've never been all that concerned. But still, thanks a lot for mentioning it. I hope I gave you some alternatives that work. Gorarog is saying, hi Jan, after d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, c6, white can play the Marshall Gambit with 4 e4. Indeed. In my eyes, this gambit is very risky for black, and Sopico's video series did not convince me to play the triangle Slav with black against a prepared opponent. Do you see an acceptable way for black to refuse the gambit? Thank you. The answer is no. If you want to play the triangle, you gotta be ready to accept that gambit with 4 e4. If you do think that it's too dangerous, then you don't play the triangle. You gotta play something else. I just did a video series on knight f6, e6, for example. And yeah, if you reach this position, you can still bail out with bishop e7 or knight f6. But after c6, e4, you got to accept the pawn. If you play bishop b4 here, for example, then I think there's too many ways you could end up in trouble. But white could also go bishop d2, and probably the best is still to transpose, because dc is very risky here as well. Therefore, yeah, I don't think there's a valid way to decline the pawn sacrifice. If you play the triangle, you gotta deal with it. Chess Higher Cat asks a similar question in a way. Hi Jan, I really hate accepting gambits. What's wrong with you people? What's more beautiful than taking a pawn? Is the Evans gambit declined a reasonable way to play for black? Or does white have a definite advantage? Could you show some ideas for both sides there? Thanks. I don't know. I always take it with mixed results, but I do think that taking the pawn is by far the easiest way to play against the Evans gambit, and the reason that no one's really playing it anymore. As for bishop b6, I think the main line is something like a4, right? Then black goes a6 and white tries knight c3. White can also play like some setup with c3, d3. Claim the bishop is not ideal on b6 here, but it's not that scary. Even though already this is a concession I wouldn't be happy to make. But yeah, I believe the main line is something like this. Or do they start with knight d5 or do they start with castles? I think they go here. And it was a bit dangerous once again to take, because after ed, knight d4, there was some d6 move or some, yeah, maybe a5 followed by d6, when we might have to accept a pawn sacrifice. So you had to do something like this. And maybe white is a little better after knight takes b6, maybe not. Anyway, too many reasons or too many options for white to maybe gain a slight edge that, yeah, just spent 10 minutes out of your busy schedule to look up one of these lines. Is this how they play? See, I can't remember a single thing myself. But to study one of the ways to accept the pawn, and you'll be much better off than trying to decline the gambits because you don't like accepting gambits. In my opinion. It's all in my opinion. Why do I always have to say I think or in my opinion? Howard 1001 says, hi Jan, in a recent slow time control tournament game, is that a correspondence game or a classical game? I had the white piece against a lower rated opponent who played an early Grunfeld, thus c4 knight f6, d4 d5, cd knight d5. I would not call that an early Grunfeld. Then many moves Howard transposes to the Queen's Gambit accepted, but you shouldn't have done that, Howard. Let me show you what's up. First of all, in the game, e4 was played, knight f6, and e5, knight d5, bishop c4. And this magically does transpose to the Queen's Gambit accepted. Because, unless I'm going crazy, but I don't think I am, this is the same position as this, which is a playable line for black, but a playable line for white, I meant to say. But not the maximum punishment for black's move order, which just doesn't make a lot of sense, frankly. Because here, after d4, d5, One subtlety you need to know. You don't have to go e4 directly, because after e4 there is indeed knight f6, and if white goes knight c3, then there's e5. This is an old trick you show kids to scare. I don't know to scare them of what, but it's an old trick. But it's easily avoided by just starting with knight f3 in this position. And white already has a very serious advantage. This is not in Grunfeld, because after g6 we don't give a knight to exchange on c3, so we just go e4. Therefore, knight f3 more or less refutes black's line. There's no good move here. After knight f6, now we can go knight c3. It's just a bad line, so you can punish it by starting with this. In the game, in the line you gave, yeah, I don't know. Looked like sensible play, but then I wouldn't have played d5, but done. I don't know what I would have done. Bishop e3, bishop c2, or what? I don't know the typical plans here. But d5 looked a bit premature, and it was equality. But opening-wise, yeah, the big mistake was move 4. Don't go e4. Play knight f3 and enjoy. Oh, once again, I'm forgetting the board. Oh boy, I'm not focused this morning. Sorry, guys. But this morning, I mean 3 p.m. We should cut these out later. Maybe not. Anyway, go knight f3 here, long story short. And after g6, play e4. After e6, also play e4. After knight f6, you go knight c3. Knight f3 sort of refutes black's opening play, which was c4, knight f6, d4, d5. In the game, you played e4, which is a mistake, because here, knight f6, after knight c3, there's e5, and as you played, e5, knight d5 transposes to a main line of the Queen's Gambit accepted, which you typically would get after d4, d5, c4, dc, e4, knight f6, e5, knight d5, bishop takes c4, which is playable, but it's not the maximum punishment for black's move order. Sorry about the board thing. I gotta start focusing. Oh, nah, I'm sure we're almost done. Too late to focus now. Anyway, next question. Are we almost done? I don't know. Chong Yong Yoon, sorry if I mispronounced that, is asking, hi Jan, what is the best try to seize advantage against Berlin defense? Well, the big questions today. How do you get an edge against the Grunfeld? How do you get an edge against the Berlin? No one in the world knows these things. Because chess is a very drawish game, and the more we keep analyzing all these main openings, the more drawish they become. So there's no good way to get an advantage against any of the main openings. Carlsen plays 5 rook e1 line and 4 d3 line in World Championship match. Yeah, I'm aware. The ending has no chance for an advantage. What's your choice against Berlin? Thanks. I typically do not enter the Berlin because I never play 1 e4. But yeah, you gotta keep switching. That's my choice against it. Like nowadays I play a lot of gioco piano, even Italian, to avoid that. That looks like as good a Berlin as any. The end game, I don't think it's that. But for now, most ideas have apparently been exhausted, especially at the highest level. I think guys are a little stuck in this king e8, h3, h5 line, which is the most solid line black has at his disposal. And it's been analyzed so deeply in so many top-level games that I guess white is a little stuck here. But yeah, what I would do, I have no idea. Like, maybe I would play rook e1, maybe I would play 4d3, maybe I would go for the endgame. It really depends. There's also, after d3, bishop c5, there's a whole universe here, depending on what move you choose next. If you go c3, if you go castles, if you go bishop takes c6. All of these lines are playable, but none of them lead to an advantage, because if that was the case, it would have been shown out there. Berlin is very good opening, unfortunately. But yeah, I don't think the endgame is hopeless, especially at a lower level. It's just at the 2750 plus level. They've sucked the life out of some of these openings. NIC2504 says, hi Jan, Happy New Year and thanks for the shows. You're very welcome. I have a question concerning the Queen's Gambit declined. After d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, and nowadays people generally play 3 bishop e7. Topic we've talked about a bit, even though I disagree with the statement. Avoiding d4, d4, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, cd, ed, bishop g5. My question is, why are people avoiding that line? And could you explain briefly why these positions are considered slightly better for white? What are the general ideas? Whoa, that's a broad question. We've talked a lot about these lines in the answers to previous questions, so maybe you got some clue from those. In the position that arises from the Cambridge Springs, d4, d5, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, e6, bishop g5, knight b7. If white goes for cd, ed, e3, is this also a good version, considered slightly better for white? Or is the knight on f3 slightly misplaced? Depends on your tastes. To answer the second part of the question, which is a bit easier, I consider it to be a good version as well via this move order, or at the very least there's no easy way for black to equalize. However, the knight on f3, first of all, it doesn't allow you to play the lines I was talking about earlier, of course, with the knight on e2 followed by castles, whatever, queen c2, and then going for these f3 plans. However, after castles, let's say rook e8, I still like white's chances here with h3, knight f8. Hang on, I forgot to play queen c2. After castles, let's say queen c2, rook e8, castles, knight f8, h3. This is a line I grew up with where I still like white's chances. We earlier talked about some stuff after g6, rook b1, and the positions that can result from it. The one thing with this knight on f3 is that, these knight h5 lines have become a bit of a nuisance to some people, and there is an option to play knight to e4, but I don't think these are particularly big problems. Knight h5, especially after queen c2. Some guys like to start with queen c2 to stop knight e4, but here, once again, we get something we've seen earlier with either h6 followed by an immediate knight h5 takes, which is a very solid setup for black. I still consider all these positions slightly better for white, and I would not be thrilled to play them with black, but that's a matter of taste pretty much, and many people are happy to defend those. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question fully, but that's all I can do. Also you can check the answers to the earlier questions on the topic, because we've spoken a lot about the Queen's Gambit declined Karlsbad structure today. Animesh Sinya says, not today, in opening clinic 14, mainly yesterday, technically. Hi Jan, I'm a lower level club player and I play the Marshall and the Spanish, but I'm really annoyed by the Italian, used by all players younger than me. Is that a young man's thing, the Italian? After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, d3, d6, h3, h6, knight c3, knight f6. In any order, I just get a very symmetrical and boring position as black. Giuco pianissimo, that was called. Anyway, to complicate matters and not allow well-known tactics and plans, knowing that those who play this are 1200 level players. But they do know well-known tactics and plans. Also, I tried using the Sicilians to imbalance stuff, but my principal rival started using the Smith Mora, which is real good in Blitz. Any suggestions here too, against the Mora, I mean? I'm a huge fan of all your shows and video series. Thanks a lot. Let's start with this, because I'm only allowed to answer one of the questions, so I'll focus on the Italian bit of it. And, well, I do understand that it's not the most exciting of lines, especially if white goes with knight c3. There are plenty ways to unbalance things. So you've given this move order, I believe you start with h3. We've said in any move order. I would normally, doesn't matter. Let's say h3 here. Here you can already unbalance things greatly by going knight a5. So this might be an idea. You want to keep an eye on in the future, because if you can grab this bishop, then black is probably already a bit better. And here this bishop does not really have a good escape route. Let's say he tries this, you chase it down. If it goes here, you can take it at will. Bishop d5, you can also go c6. So this might be one idea to keep in mind. This knight a5 to unbalance the situation also works after knight c3, for example. Same idea, knight a5 and grab the bishop. Then, yeah, I would normally start with knight f6. I'm not sure it makes a particular difference, but the idea still applies. Here, throw in knight a5, grab the bishop, and enjoy life. Which I'm sure these young 1200s, they won't be so familiar with this knight a5 grabbing the bishop, so they can't play their standard plan so easily. And you'll have great results. I hope that idea alone helps you. Else, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be, well, I've never studied this in detail. It's not considered to be highly critical. I wouldn't be all that concerned, but being first to get a knight a5 before your opponent gets a knight a4, even though I don't think that's typically part of 1200 players' arsenal to go for knight a4 grabbing this bishop, is one important theme to keep an eye on in these positions. I hope that will help you. Best of luck, especially against your principal rival, that mean bully playing the Mora. Schneewittchen is unfortunately not a premium member. Sheen79 says, "Hi Jan, thanks for the videos and commentary. Do you have good openings against the King's Gambit? Ways to refute the opening. Tend to play e4, e5, f4, ef, knight f3, g5, bishop c4. There are problems defending the f7 pawn. Why are there problems? I don't have very high opinion on the King's Gambit, as I've stated many times. And with that arrogance of mine and the fact that I never really look at it, I'm sure I'm due for some punishment. But yeah, I do have good openings against the King's Gambit. d5, ed, knight f6 is one very easy way to, at the very least, equalize. Probably black slightly better there. I do like g5 as well, as you mentioned. And after bishop c4, I'd be more concerned about h4 here. But I think black is also fine in this. After bishop c4, bishop g7. Why is it so hard to defend f7? Whenever they go h4, you go h6. You don't allow any shenanigans with knights on g5. Then you continue by playing d6, followed by knight c6. Then, according to the situation, either bishop g4, queen e7, bishop somewhere, long castles, sometimes knight f6. I believe black is seriously better here. Or, I don't know, shouldn't overdo it. I believe black is fine here because of his extra pawn. So yeah, that sounds like a fine line to play. After, I don't know, there's many decent moves. h6, d6, g5, d5, knight e7, knight f6, bishop e7 I'm not sure about. No, I'll end my list with knight f6. So the Niasty is asking, "Hi Jan, after e4, e5, d4, ed, queen d4, knight c6, queen e3, with plan to make long castle with white. What is a good approach for black?" That line has been more or less refuted, and we don't see it very often anymore. I think the source game is a game played by my friend Paco Vallejo against Jan Nepomniachtchi. Very spectacular game by Vallejo as well, so check that out for all the fireworks. But in general, yeah, it's not surprising that white wasting all this time in the opening will backfire. And after bishop b4, bishop d2, long castles, rook e8. I don't think white is equal, so it's not a great line. Queen to g3 is what they used to play, but we can just play knight takes e4. For many years, for some reason, rook takes e4 was more trendy, but knight takes e4 is perfectly fine. Paco's game was something like bishop to f4 here. Some alternatives, but black is better against all of them. Bishop f4, queen f6, knight h3, d6. This is Nepomniachtchi Vallejo. Bishop d3, knight d4, and some nice fireworks. Bishop e4 runs into knight to e2. It basically ends this line. So white cannot play like this. I hope that helped. Did I miss a question? I'm seeing in the chat. Oh, looks like I did. Apologies. Nicholas Kung number 5 says, "Hi Jan, Happy New Year. I would like to know about your work for Magnus Carlsen. Which concrete positions that occurred during the match did you work on? Was there any opening success failures that you're responsible for?" Yeah, I can't answer that one. I'm sorry, Nicholas Kung. It's all strictly confidential. Sheen79 says, "Hi Jan." Ah no, that one I had. So I did miss that question, but maybe my subconscious avoided it on purpose. I don't know. Nah, but I'm sorry. Can't talk about it. And I wouldn't even if I could. Donald Hooker says, how do you feel about the line e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes e5, d6, knight f3, knight takes e4, knight c3, knight f6? Do you think this line is fully equalizing? It is super popular at the highest level of correspondence chess. Yeah, it looks like a correspondy kind of line. I don't know much about it. I do know that in non-correspondence chess, the majority of players still go knight takes c3. There's been some outings with knight f6, which is logical to some extent. It loses a lot of time, but black keeps a very, very solid structure. Doesn't have any weaknesses, really. So I do believe that in correspondence chess, this is probably going to be absolutely impossible to win with white. However, in over the board play, white has some more chances after h3, followed by castle. He does keep a bit of an advantage thanks to his space advantage and tiny lead in development. Typical plans are bring this knight around. Sometimes some players like to think about going d5 or just getting the pieces out. I don't have anything revolutionary to say. I haven't studied this line in detail. I do think it's objectively fine, and if the correspondence dudes play it, that only reinforces that feeling. But I'm not that surprised that black players aren't lining up to play this in over-the-board play all that much. However, things might change. As for computer talk, my computer says white has 0.29 here, which is not a lot, but it's a tiny bit better than what you would normally get out of the opening. Chuba says, very simple question. In the title it says Wednesday 3rd January, but Wednesday is already the 4th of January. So is this the 4th, or is it taking place today on Tuesday the 3rd? That's the most pressing opening question you had, Chuba. I don't know what it says in the title, but maybe it was still right, once again subconsciously, because we're doing this show both yesterday on Tuesday the 3rd and today on Wednesday the 4th. So maybe the title cleverly combined those, because I didn't manage to answer all the questions on Tuesday the 3rd. I decided to answer some of them on Wednesday the 4th. I hope that answers your question, but I'm not sure. Who knows? Maybe we'll continue on Friday the 5th. It's going to be very confusing. I play for fun. He is not a premium member. He only plays for fun. Therefore, I can't answer his question. Chess Daniel says, hi Jan, my question is gone. What a poem. What happened there? Exchange variation Queen's Gambit. Finally, question on that. Why not bishop e7, h6 and knight h5 like Adams? Or is after so versus Anand something general wrong? I don't know. I don't think it is. It's like so many questions that the wording is not exactly the same, but the meaning is always the same. And all I have to say is, yeah, it's playable for black, but I prefer not to do it because, yeah, it's slightly passive and I don't like the upside, but it's an absolutely playable line. How do we get there? I think I've made this point earlier that especially these knight h5 lines, they become a little tougher to play if white has not played queen 2 yet. So something like this, knight h5, takes, castles, queen to d2. And there were some games, I'm not sure if this is so Anand as you're referring to. I think white is slightly better, but it's certainly a playable line for black, which we've discussed, I believe, even in a previous clinic as well. I don't know. I wouldn't want to do it with black, but it's absolutely defensible, defendable, and all the other words starting with defend. So I'm not advising against it. It's just, yeah, it's a bit passive for my taste in general to play this pure structure. Not a big fan. That's all I can say. It's more a subjective evaluation. I'd much rather be white here, but that doesn't really mean that's losing. I know I've given variations of that same answer many a time, but I blame you guys. You're all asking the same. I still hope it helped a bit. Kurgan01 is saying, hi Jan, I play Caro-Kann exclusively, against e4 exclusively. Are there any lines that I could use against d4? Thanks. I think you should play Slav exclusively against d4. Then you always have a pawn on c6. I'm half joking, but only half. Slav is a natural companion because you also go d5, c6 if that makes you happy. Else, I believe the whole universe of lines against d4 is available to you. Caro-Kann players, it's slightly more positional, I would say. So maybe the Nimzo combined with some classical Queen's Gambit is also an option for you. But I think you can play whatever you want. I talked about it yesterday that I don't really believe in these pairs of openings that you want, white square strategies, dark square strategies. Play whatever suits you. Or maybe even give up on your very strong stance on playing the Caro-Kann exclusively. Widen your horizons one day. I don't know. Kabalov says, I'm not a premium member. That's what he's saying. So I can't talk to him. Well, we almost made it, but we saved the worst for last because Simpo137 is asking about another topic I don't have a clue about. I have been entering, he says, hi Jan, I've been entering the sharp lines in the Bishop g5 Najdorf by playing Bishop g5, e6, f4, h6, Bishop h4, Queen to b6. There were recently a lot of games where White played a3 followed by Bishop f2, not gambiting the b2 pawn, and I'm now facing this more often online. Is this line in trouble, and how can I spice this up if White goes for this approach? Feels pretty spicy to me. Sorry, thanks for all your great work on @chess24. Now, I'm not a doctor and not a big Najdorf specialist, but of course I did notice games like Giri MVL, Nakamura MVL, and most recently, most spectacularly, maybe not most recently, but most spectacularly Caruana against Nakamura. So I've seen what's going on here. My first question, it's not so much to you, but it's something I don't fully understand. I should ask one of these experts one day. A lot of guys start with h6, Bishop h4, Queen b6 now, allowing this line with a3. How does it go? Bishop e7, Bishop f2. Queen c7, which seems to ask some difficult questions indeed. Why did they stop playing Queen b6 immediately and started going for this h6, Queen b6? I understand that after Queen d2 here takes Rook b1, Queen a3, after e5 it's useful that you threw in h6 already. As far as I can tell, after Queen b6, let's say White goes Queen d2, takes Rook b1, Queen a3, after e5. If we go h6 here, the best White has is still Bishop h4, transposing to this line. So I never fully got why it was so important to start with h6. And that's not really a comment, it's more of a question, because I'm sure there's some obvious point to the specialists that I'm not aware of. But yeah, that would be my first starting point. Start with Queen b6, not with h6. Are they trying to avoid knight b3? Is knight b3 considered trouble nowadays? Maybe that is it, because after h6, Bishop h4, Queen b6, you can't go knight b3 due to Queen e3 check. But I haven't really seen any knight b3 renaissance or a lot of games with Queen b6, knight b3, and people saying this is great. So that would be my advice, because yeah, it looks, at least from the games I've seen, that in this line currently White is asking some quite difficult questions, right? At least in practice Black has been in trouble. Even in this game MVL1 against Anish, he was in some trouble. And in the more recent outings after g4, g5, h4, well, who was it? Caruana won this brilliancy against Nakamura. This I had a bit of a look at, and it does seem nice for Black, nice for White. What's this weird b4, I believe even earlier, takes, e5, Queen f6, Bishop f6, Knight d5, Queen d8, Knight f5, which just seems good for White. Even if you don't throw in b4, there was another thing I didn't understand why you had to throw in b4, but even if you do this, things still seem to work for White. Knight d5, Queen d8, Knight f5, even here without b4, ab. Black might be in trouble. I'm not sure, that could be too strong, but it didn't convince me all that much. So to answer the question, yeah, from what I've seen, and once again, disclaimer, not a doctor, against h6 currently, Black is having some troubles with his Bishop h4, a3, but I have not understood why people stop playing, or I'm not sure if stop playing is fair. Anish Giri still played this recently. Why you don't just start with Queen b6. I hope that helped. And I hope I did not say I hope that helped too many times. That was the last question in this second part of the clinic. Wow, 2.5 hours yesterday, almost 2 today. Lots of questions. Looks like Chess24 is growing, which of course is great news, but also makes it harder to do these opening clinics. What can I plug? Yeah, check out my video series, of course, on the Nimzo, Vienna, and Catalan. The first 3 parts are out. I understood you guys want a 4th part on the London and so on. It will come one day. But before it comes, we will commentate the Wijk aan Zee tournament from our studios in Hamburg. We'll do our own show. It's gonna be mainly me, of course, because that's what you really want to see. But we also have some putzers, like Peter Svidler is gonna be there for most of the, I don't know, 7 rounds? I think the first 7 or maybe even 8 rounds. Peter Svidler is gonna be with us. And then, even better, I'm not sure if even better, but I personally am very happy about it. A comeback from our old friend Lawrence Trent. I've always enjoyed it tremendously to work with Lawrence. When Peter Svidler leaves us for Gibraltar, Lawrence Trent will be commentating with me on the second half of the tournament. So it's going to be me, Svidler, then Lawrence Svidler for one day, so they at least get to know each other, and then me and Lawrence. That should be a lot of fun, and will keep us plenty busy for the second half of January. Tune in if you feel like. Else, yeah, we'll be doing the usual Banter Blitzes, Geschwätzblitzes, all the good stuff. Why am I telling you all this? I'm sure you'll find out if you want to see it. If not, then don't. Thank you guys for watching. Very sorry about the cold. Very sorry if I missed a question, if I didn't answer your question to your satisfaction. All that stuff. See you next time. Bye. Welcome back. This is like the Marvel post credits, making you wait for 5 minutes, but mainly because I saw in the chat that I might have forgotten the board again. Did I forget the board again? Where did I forget the board? Please inform me. Was it in the Marshall, in the Najdorf stuff? Anybody still here? I'll just give my Najdorf speech again. Probably I can resume. I don't know. The last question, there was no board, so I'm guessing it's this stuff, yep? Okay, so what did I have to say about this? After f4, h6, bishop h4, queen b6. I do think that this trendy line they're playing with a3, stopping queen b2 because of knight a4, is a bit of a problem. At least it looked like it from the games I've seen. Bishop e7, bishop f2, how does this go? Queen c7, queen f3, knight bd7, long castles, b5, g4, bishop to b7, or pawn to g5. White has suffered, no, black has suffered in the games Giri, MVL, Nakamura, MVL, and Caruana against Nakamura. Caruana, Nakamura, maybe the most where all this stuff was played. b4 at some point. Takes. And this nice queen sacrifice with a very strong position for white. So I do believe that line is in trouble without having done a lot of research. But I am not quite sure why people do not start with queen b6 anymore, but have to throw in this h6. If white goes queen d2, takes rook b1, queen a3, e5, I think the best move is considered to be h6. Maybe people like it to have h6, bishop h4 already included, and therefore they start with this. But after h6, as far as I can tell, the best move for white is still bishop to h4. Therefore, I'm not quite sure what the fuss is about. Another thing, I was thinking about, but I haven't seen this played in many games, is maybe they want to eliminate knight b3, because if you go h6, bishop h4, queen b6, then knight b3 is not really an option because of queen e3 check, and f4 is unprotected. But I've never heard of any talk that knight b3 was big issue. So I'd be surprised. Not sure what you do against knight b3. I guess now you just develop and claim the knight is worse on b3 than on d4. There's also the option of giving queen e3 check anyway. And white's best move is queen e2 with some endgame, normally exchanging queens favors black. So yeah, mainly I'm confused why you need to include this h6, bishop h4, and why many specialists like Nakamura or MVL keep doing it. I don't fully understand it when you can just start with queen b6, which does not seem to have a big downside compared to h6, bishop h4, queen b6. But that's mainly probably ignorance on my part. I just don't get it. But yeah, from what I've seen in these h6, bishop h4, queen b6, a3 lines, it does look like the ball, at the very least, is in black's half at the moment. Black's half? Black's court? Anyway, apologies for forgetting the board so often. It's very tough for me to switch between all these windows. I hope that now we have a board on every question. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.